Okay. Guten Tag, Berlin. I have strong connection with Germany. My husband is German from the Southland. My son speaks fluent German, and I don't understand much when they speak together. I lived 1 year in Germany at the University of Dortmund when I was a postdoc. And that's it. I know Guten Tag, Danke, Dankeschön, and ein Glas Weißwein. So I think I will stick to English. So what I'm going to present is work that I have done with many people, in particular at the Yahoo Labs. It is my experience about trying to understand and measure user engagement. I come from a computer science background, so I had to learn a lot. I had to learn how to control, to carry out user study, how to develop a questionnaire. Coming from computer science, you just ask the user, do you like it? And you hope the user say yes. And it doesn't work like this. So, and I hope that you can appreciate the learning curve that I went through from writing algorithms to build questionnaires. So I come from a computer science background. I worked many years in evaluation in the context of XML retrieval. And then after that, I moved from London to Glasgow, where I changed completely topics, still in information retrieval, trying to build an interactive model of information retrieval based on quantum theory. I decided it was not going to work, or I was not the person to do this. I was lucky to be able to go as a visiting scientist in Barcelona to start working, again, going back to evaluation, but this time focusing on user engagement. If you ever want to do something in your life and you have the opportunity to go to Barcelona, go for it. It's wonderful. And then I'm back now in London, where I work actually mostly still related to user engagement, but on native advertising. So what I will be presenting, so I have a lot of slides, and I don't have to go through all of them. But I will start with defining what is user engagement, the way we're approaching it, our definition, characteristic, and give a brief overview of the kind of approaches. Then I will discuss attribute. So if you were asked to, I need to understand engagement, respect a particular website, and so on, those are attributes you may want to consider. I may not be able to go through all of them, but hopefully will give you an idea. So this is really based on mostly the work we have done. Another thing to be also aware, I'm discussing user engagement in the context of where you can choose a particular application to work on, not where, for example, you are obliged to use a particular tool. This is beyond user engagement, that's different. Okay, so for example, you can choose this side or this side. This is where the notion of user engagement is what I've been focusing. So, the first part, what is user engagement? Do I speak okay? Not too fast? Okay. You don't want to hear me speaking German, really. Okay, so, yeah. So the definition we adopted after reading quite a lot in the literature, so it's a part of the user experience. It is not the user experience. It's a component of the user experience that relate to the fact that a user wants to use technological resource on a regular basis. There are various aspects to wanting to do so. There is the emotion. I like it, I'm happy. Even being sad is okay if you play games and so on. There is the cognitive aspect, what it does to your body. Do you become more focused? Where does your eye look? And so on. And there are the behavioral. You're clicking, you're spending time, you're sharing, and so on. So all those are all aspects of the user engagement. They tend to be studied with respect to different areas, different schools, different expertise. And what I've been trying to do is to bring them together. And it's been an interesting journey, and it's far from finished. So the way I did this is to look at one particular way to look at it is via self-report. Then the other one is via a measurement through physiology, and then the last one through analytics. And I will describe each of them more. So why is it important? We have a choice now. I can use this tool or I can use this other tool. When I use a tool, I have high expectation. It is not just about I can do the job with that tool. I expect much more. I expect to have fun. I expect to feel the experience of using that tool. Because there is competition now, this is why there's a lot of focus. Okay, what is an engaging experience? How can I ensure that my site is engaging, and so on. So when people ask me, so is my site engaging? And I'm like, well, it depends, because engagement is very different depending on the type of site. So we analyze a lot of data. At Yahoo, we have access to a lot of log data where we could see, for example, respect to search, social media, news, totally different way for user to interact and how this reflects to engagement. Search. A good search engine is one, you arrive, you submit the query, you get the result, and you get out. Time spent on the site should be minimum. What is important is you return regularly. The next time you have an information need, you go back to the search engine. News. This is where you spend a bit more time. There's some sort of like periodicity involved in it. You go in the morning, you go later, and so on. So again, the time span and the fact that this particular time of the day. Games, unless you're a complete addict, you don't go too often, hopefully, but when you go, you spend time. And social media, this is kind of changing now. You go, come back, and so on. So what this is saying is like you may have some views that time spent on the site is a good measure of engagement. You should make sure that it is really about engagement and not something else. Why is it important to be careful? So imagine you have a site, you make some change, and your measure of engagement is click-through rate. People come and do a lot of clicking. Three things can happen. The first one, after your launch, there's no more click. If this is important for you, you may decide, okay, something is going wrong, I have to look into this. What also may happen, and often it does happen, there are much, much more clicks, and then there's less click and less. What this means, the change has caused some confusion to the user. So you think that your site is successful, but actually it is not, because you have confused the user. The user used to be able to do his or her task in 3 clicks, now need 20, and then we'll move somewhere else. What you really want is some sort of steady engagement in terms of CTR, click-through rate, if this is what you're looking into. So I've been working with a lot of students. I've been a long time in academia, and they develop system and they compare one interface to another interface, and they came to me, oh, this one is better because there's more click. No, make sure the value of the click. So what are the characteristics of user engagement? So there's a number of them. They were extracted from various people trying to understand what characterize the fact that a user is engaged. The first one is focused attention. If you engage, you are focused. Just think about the fact that when you're doing something that is exciting compared to something that is boring. Okay? So when you engage, you completely focus in what you're trying to do. One way actually to measure that is to ask the user, how long did you think you spent time performing the task? If it's longer to the actual task, is a strong sign of engagement, meaning that the user was focused. Positive effect, this is related to the emotion. If you have fun, if you like what you've been doing with that particular site, you are likely to want to use it again. Aesthetic. So this is something we came across a lot when we looked at user engagement. If your site is a mess, it's maybe no point looking at the engagement yet. sort out the usability aspect, and then try to understand the engagement. And I will explain a study that we did, which actually we discovered this in a funny way. And durability, this is about the fact that you want to reuse it. You're going to tell people, let's use it. You're going to recommend that particular application also to other people. Social media is a particularly good way to look at signals. Novelty. We like to be entertained. We like novel things. When I go on a new site, I expect new content. But there's always a trade-off. When I go to my mail tool, I don't want something novel every day. So again, there is a balance about the level of novelty, so users want to come back. Richness and control. You want a rich experience, but you want to have some control on it. So I have a 12-year-old son that likes to play games in every possible device that can exist. He has to be excited, he has to be challenged. So this is a richness of the experience. But if it's too challenging, he's like, Mama, this is not working. Okay, so there is a level, and then, make it rich, but not to the point of giving up. Reputation, trust, and expectation. So this is, if you go and use Wikipedia, you will have different expectations to if you use, I don't know, for example, some blogs or gossip blogs and so on. So people build some sort of affinity with the site they are using. They expect that the content is trustworthy, they expect that the interaction is trustworthy, and so on. Then the final, which is actually the most difficult if you're working on measurement, is why are you engaging? If you design experiments where you want to get people, the why is the most difficult, because unless you give a tool to people and let them using, and then they tell you why they like it, designing an experiment to understand why you want to engage with it compared to that, this is a little bit more difficult, and we often actually struggle with this aspect. So the attributes now. There are a number of them. I'm only going to discuss definitely 3, and the 4th one, the scale, large measurement, small measurement, and I will give examples. Setting, laboratory, you get people to come, or on the field. Objective versus subjective. Do you measure something that you know that's the right measure, the time spent, or do you ask a user how they feel about their experience? And temporality. Is it an engagement at the short level? The user came, did that, or at a more long term, the user returned? And the rest of the presentation will be around those attributes and how the work we've been doing try to look at this. Just one thing, one is not better than the other. It really depends what you want to do, the constraints, and so on. So in terms of the 3 types of measurement we've been looked into, self-report, this is where you ask the people. This is done via questionnaire, interview, think aloud, and think after protocols. This is where I learn quite a lot, working with people that actually design those self-report measurements. It is subjective. You ask the people. It is short-term. They come. You give them a task, and then you ask a question related to the engagement with that task. It can be also long-term. They come back. They come back, and you see how engagements change. It can be done, it's usually often done in the lab. You get people to come, but you can still go to people's house and try to understand how they engage, for example, doing their own stuff. It is small scale. You need people to answer detailed questionnaires and so on. Physiology, so this is where you kind of try to plug everything you can into a person. You're trying to measure what's happening in the brain, like the fact that they are sweating, and so on. So this is receiving quite a lot of focus now because there's a lot of instrumentation. It is getting slightly less expensive. Eye tracking has been used for many years now, and now there is the usage of mouse tracking, and I will discuss our experience with that. It is objective. You actually measure something that the user is doing. The user is not telling you anything. It is short-term. You're not going to bring somebody and let them do something for like days and days with an eye tracker. It can be done, it's usually done in the lab. You need to plug people. But with mouse tracking, it can be done in a field. This is what I will be discussing. And this is small and large scale. And there's the analytics. So this is the web analytic work from Nielsen, Comscore, and so on, where here you have metrics. You have metrics at the session level. The user is interacting with a particular product within the session, and across session. The user is returning, and so on. So this is the whole area which is called data science. It is objective. It is short-term within the session, but also long-term. You can try to follow patterns across users long-term. It is in the field. You don't actually get the user to come near you, and large-scale. So what I've been trying to do is, okay, there's a lot of work done by various people who are expert in their various area. How can we combine those three types of approaches? And the reason is to really come up with reliable and valid measurement. So dwell time, for example, I will speak about it later. So what I will go now is I'm going to go through those 4 attributes, and this is where I will explain the work we have done, some result, that is result in terms of what we learned in terms of user engagement, but more importantly, how to measure it properly and how to interpret the outcomes properly. So scalability. You can have dozens of users coming. This is usually when you want to do a qualitative study of user engagement associated with the product, or you want to plug them and do some eye tracking study. 100, 2,000, you can do such study using online survey. And millions, this is analytic. So when you come, you get people to come, you ask detailed questions, think aloud protocols, and so on. You tend to get very, very rich information. Often with the problem, it's difficult to generalize it. And at the other end, when you look at analytics, you get a lot of information that is, you can understand it to the point that, yeah, user come here, they spend always 2 minutes, this is a strong sign of engagement, but you don't know what it means in terms of those 2 minutes. Are they good 2 minutes? And so on. So large-scale measurements, so analytics, so those are a lot of analytics that have been used by many companies. Dwell time, so this is the time spent on a site or on a page. The duration of the session, bounce rate. If somebody arrives in your site and just return, okay, that's a negative signal, and so on. I just want to say a little bit more about dwell time. It's receiving quite a lot of noise at the moment. A lot of people are quite interested in using that measure. It's been recently shown to actually be a better prediction of user being satisfied by the news they are recommended, that, for example, click. So the fact that user goes somewhere is not as important as the fact that user, when arriving at that page, spend time on it. It is also used as a proxy of relevance in the context of search. You get a search result, you go on the result page, you click, and then you spend time on it. And in the context of advertising, it is also a signal of, for proxy of conversion. And this is like an intra-session measure. So Those are the large scale. Now the small scale. So this is a study that actually was done by a former colleague of mine, which looks at eye tracking. So trying to understand eye tracking. So the task was given to 18 users. They had 16 tasks each. And what they had to do is to pick the news that they will be interested in reading. And what was recorded is the eye, where they were looking into. So what was found out is actually when you have like pictures or the position of, for example, the news article, had a strong effect in attracting where the user was looking. This is kind of known. However, when the user decide what to read, the interest in the content was a primary motivation. So they can maybe look there, but actually when it's time to click, something else happened. So this is to show that with eye tracking, you could see what's happening in terms of what the user is doing, but this is not necessarily the same as in the context of a selection where the user goes. So questionnaire. So those are questionnaires now, again, in the context of small-scale measurement that have been developed by people based in Canada. So this is related to the focus attention. So this is when your focus is about being lost in your experience. And those are questions that actually we have been using in our study. They work to some extent, maybe to some other extent, not so much. So I lost myself in this news task experience. The time I spent performing this new task, just slip it away. Another tool we use is the PANAS questionnaire, which stands for Positive and Negative Affect Scale. So this is where you ask people to give between 1 to 5 how they feel before the experience and after the experience. There are the negative part and the positive one. What we found in our study is the negative one does not really matter much. Usually the kind of user engagement that we are studying, the experience is not like scary. It's more about the level of the positiveness than the negative. You don't get ashamed or distressed or hostile, hopefully, and so on. So this is also what we observe. We tend to only focus on the positive. So what we're trying to do again, so let's take two types of small-scale measurement, the eye tracking and those type of questionnaires, the focus attention and the emotion, the effect. So we took news from Yahoo News. We managed to identify users that were interested in one particular news compared to another one. The study had 57 users. It was a lab-based, and the task was reading. We measure the eye, and we ask them to answer those questionnaires. What we found, which was nice, is all metrics align with respect to the interestingness of the content. So when everything was positive, they all align. So each individual itself is not necessarily new, but for us, from term to like reliability and validity, we managed to show that everything aligned together. Then, okay, so eye tracking. Okay, it's aligned with a questionnaire typically defined to measure user engagement. Let's just push a little bit and let's look at mouse tracking. So mouse tracking, it's the fact that you use a computer. There's usually a mouse because you're going to be selecting, clicking, and so on. And there's a lot of work that has been shown, especially in the context of search, that the gaze, where the eyes is looking, align to some extent to where the mouse is going. So the idea, because mouse is more scalable, it also is something that you don't bring the user with you, meaning that they still remain in the natural environment. Let's just see whether we can try to push the boundary from small scale to large scale. Large scale for us is the analytic, but let's just do first the mouse because of this alignment. So this is itself not new. So for example, in the context of search, it has been shown that user clicking on 2 pages, they spend the same amount of time. So this is a dwell time. So if you use dwell time as a measure of relevance, you will think, okay, they are equally relevant. But when you look at their mouse movement, there is a difference. The relevant one, you can see there's much more pattern. The user is actually reading what's going on. Well, the other one, the non-relevant one, the user is skimming, trying to find the information. So again, you've got dwell time, the same, but the mouse movement is telling you different behavior in terms of the relevance of the page. So it does work. So let's see how this would work in our context. So we still continue with our study, 22 users, and we calculated what is called mouse gesture. So you've got the mouse, you've got this point, and so on. There's a click, and there's a rest, and so on. And then we try to cluster the mouse gesture. I will not give you the detail. There's a lot of machine learning and clustering and so on. So we identified 38 type of mouse gesture. 38 type of clusters grouping the mouse gesture. So this is what we actually found. So those are our 22 users. Each color there is a group of gesture. So the very dominant one is actually rest. So when people are reading, they're resting a lot on the page. But then the rest varies. So what we actually found, looking at correlation and so on, so depending on whether the user is interested in the article or not, the mouse gesture change. We could also see correlation, and this is the first time we saw that showed that the mouse gesture could be a good predictor of the focus attention and also the PANAS things. So mouse gesture in the context of reading has often been useful to identify frustration. I don't like it, so you move the mouse a bit harsher. While here, it was able to identify level of positiveness and level of negativity, which is itself quite interesting. Okay, so this was scalability. Now, setting. So you get the people to come. So those are laboratory experiment or in the wild. You just want to see how people behave in terms of the engagement. When people come, you can put some control. You have a hypothesis, A, B, and so on. When they don't come, well, I've been looking at a lot of data. It's just random. It's unbelievable what the user do, and you're trying to identify patterns, even when you have 2 million of users. So, but when you find the patterns, it's great, because it's actually there, and so on. So what we've been trying to do is something in the middle. We wanted more users than the 60, but something that provides us deeper understanding. And this is why we have made use of crowdsourcing. I don't know, are you familiar with Amazon Mechanical Turk? One? Okay. There's a whole research area around crowdsourcing. So this is where you actually register to get people to do your task. So you pay them not as expensive as if you get people to come and sit in front of the computer, meaning you can go from 60 users to 500 for nearly the same price. So we decided, okay, let's just see if crowdsourcing works, because this is about user engagement. So we focused this time on self-report, and we decided to study visual catchiness, saliency, and how this would affect, focus, attention, and effect, but using crowdsourcing to get our user. So we did some manipulation. So this actually was an intern working with me at Yahoo when I was in Barcelona. So it was in the context of news, celebrity. So you have you have this case, which is the original case, and this is the manipulated one where we made some title much more salient. we have this model of saliency that was developed by others. So you upload the page, and you know what are the salient points in your page. So this was before the manipulation, and this is after the manipulation. And you can see that this component becomes suddenly salient. So this is based on cognitive theory done by other people. So we wanted to see, okay, so does it help to do a task when your task is actually to answer a question relating to some headlines? So we use Amazon Turk. Again, we use the focus attention questionnaire, the PANAS, but we also ask people related to whether they were interested in the topic. We had one page about Justin Bieber, and he was not popular. Most people just hated him. That was before that he became even more bizarre than he was before. So at that time, we decided to go for 200 users. There's a lot of effort that has to be done when you do those kind of experiments because there are spammers and so on. So there's a lot of controls to make sure that the data that you're getting is correct. So what did we find? When headlines are non-salient, actually, yes, we could see people were, it was easier to find. The user reported like more distraction, and there was a drop in affect. So when you make the task easier, what we saw is people do not become happier necessarily. But if you make the task more difficult, they become less happy, which was interesting. It's just this notion. You can do whatever you want. You cannot make the people so happy, but it's easier to make them annoyed, and so on. And this is what I say in the rest. However, for the focus attention and so on, there was no difference. So, and we understood why, because they were focused in both cases. They're likely to be even more focused where the task was more difficult because they have to solve the task. They were getting paid, so they had to do it. So again, it's just to show how measurements you have to always try to understand carefully what it means. However, we show that user interest in the web page content is a good predictor of the focus. So they didn't look at Justin Bieber, but others more, which was itself a good predictor of the positive effect. So again, the interest came. This was very, very dominant. But what we were happy with is crowdsourcing works. It really worked. We were very worried because there's so much teaching and so on, and we got a lot of feedback about aspects of the experiment and so on. So we're actually using this quite a lot. How long more do I have? Well, no. Okay. Okay, so the next one is a funny one. This is where we thought we started to know what we were doing, and it just ended up in complete disaster. And I think it's always important to know the disaster story. So we wanted to look at objectivity and subjectivity. So objective, you measure dwell time, you measure click, eye tracking, mouse tracking, and so on. And subjective, you ask the people how they feel. So objectivity, you know what's going on because you observe it. And subjectivity, you understand what's going on. And the idea is to try to map those two. It's also related, of course, to the scale. So we decided to do that exactly. We use crowdsourcing because we're happy. We use mouse movements because we were happy with it. So this is also another work done with an intern who was actually a human-computer interaction person with a very good software engineer. And he had fun messing up website. So do you recognize? One is the BBC, and one is Wikipedia. Okay? He promised me that he did it in a way that it is still usable. I will never use Wikipedia in blue, but so people could, in principle, still do the task. So what we were trying to do is like, let's make the task more difficult. Let's mess up a bit the interface, put ads, change colors, but it's still possible to do the task. And let's see what the measures are telling us. So we use mouse tracking again, where we calculate movement speed, movement rate, click rate, and so on. Amazon Turk, we actually recruited 324 users. We did a between subject design. We thought, okay, do we give a user a blue interface and then the normal interface and trying to understand the engagement? We thought, no, this is not the right approach because engagement is like you can't engage, whatever it means, but it's not, you cannot compare with between one or the other. So we decided that a user only see blue cases or normal cases. And this is what is called between subject design. And of course, if you have enough users, then the statistics talks for you. We give them 2 tasks, reading and a search task. And a lot of questionnaires, like really a lot. And the result. The mouse tracking could not tell us anything about the focus, attention, or the emotion. Nothing. There was no difference. It didn't say much about whether the user was interested in a topic or not. And they just didn't say, it could not, there was no difference in the mouse movement with the ugly version, the blue version, to the normal version. They were slightly more annoyed that we messed up Wikipedia, because you don't touch Wikipedia. This is notion of trust, expectation. The BBC, well, is a news website, and so on. So the questionnaires were just like, they like both or dislike both, no differences. However, we have like this comment. They actually noticed there was something wrong happening. So you can read it. Okay? They noticed. And interestingly, only in the blue cases, the horrible cases, people were writing comments, not the other. So crowdsourcing works, but something else didn't work. And we just like, what did we do wrong? This is not possible. We spent like 1.5 months to do the design. We know our job, and so on. So I learned this word, working with HCI people, the Hawthorne effect, which is you get people, they do a task, they know they're doing the task. So they kind of sometimes inflate the score, and so on. The design, within or between, of course, if we have shown them the blue and the normal, they must have reacted more. But we still feel that this is not the right things when you try to measure engagement. This is not about one interface is better than the other. Some other people say, well, you should have made the interface even worse. But this is like entering usability. It is, unless you want to really study the level of ugliness in an interface and impact on user engagement, your interface or your site should be decent. There is not much you're going to learn in terms of engagement if the experience is frustrated. What we actually found out is the mouse movement. We didn't do eventually a good job with this. We looked at just the appearance of mouse movement. We didn't look at sequences and so on. And work that I presented earlier actually show that you can see some signals and so on. So what this is I'm trying to say is get your methodology correct. If you don't find something, don't give up. Try to understand what does it mean. Because it's very difficult to try to say, well, this is a wrong way to do it, or actually there's no relationship. And no relationship is a result on its own. You can come up and say, this way to measure engagement is not working. Or there's actually no engagement. Okay, so the last bit is temporality. So a lot of the work we tend to do is at the session level. The time spent on a particular site, eye tracking, how people interact, and so on. What is actually very important in the context of engagement is long-term. You can come up with results saying this people tend to spend more time here than here. What is important is how does this translate to people coming back? So what we've been trying to look is to try to map short-term metrics to long-term metrics. And I will give you one example that show that it can work. So just to give more information about metrics, so I show briefly the intra-session measures. So this is within the session. And what we're trying to look is at the inter-session measure. So you know what's happening here. Next session, next session. So trying to predict what's happening here to future engagement. So time between visit, number of transactions, number of sessions per unit of time, and so on. So those are other measures that allow you to look at the inter-session measures. The intra-session measures are more about the activity, what the user is doing, while the inter-session measure is more about the loyalty of the user. All are important in terms of user engagement. So one study we did, we took absence time. The hypothesis is if your experience is good, you're likely to return sooner back to the site. And log data can give you this information. You identify user by anonymized browser cookie, and you see when they come back. It's not as easy as that because there's a lot of instrumentation issue, but if you do it properly, you get a good indication, and if you have enough users, 2 million. So what we did, so this was in the context of search, since I have a good background in search. So we looked at 6 types of algorithms, buckets that were running on the Yahoo Answer Japan. So people could search within Yahoo Answer Japan, 6 different buckets, and trying to see the effect in the absence time. So there's quite some mathematical survival analysis to try to map and correlate and so on. But by doing so, we identify clear indication that can map short-term metrics to long-term metrics. Again, this is in the context of search. So click after the 5th result reflect poorer user experience. So if users are clicking below 5, they're not likely to return sooner than the other way around. No clicks mean a bad user experience. Again, this is the context of Yahoo Answer Search. Clicking at the bottom is a sign of low quality. So the user go through usually those 10 links. If the users click at the end, this was like, well, they just click because, well, they have to click. User likes to click. They believe the search engine is right and they're going to click. But if it tends to be at the end, it's a sign, okay, well, just let's click. Bad experience. The time to the click, so they find the result very quickly, was a good experience. So if time to click was short, good experience, absence time was lower. And then in some cases, the information need is complex and so on. So user returning to the same result page was worse than reformulating the query. So you got there's a click, you go somewhere, and then you return, or you type a new query. This could be shown as the second case to be like the user is already more into what he or she is looking, while returning back was like, wow, that was rubbish. Let's start again from the beginning. So again, this is what we're trying to do a lot, is to try to map short-term, what can we use from the short-term to predict long-term. And I know there was some work done by people, data scientists, that worked as part of the New York Times, and they did something similar, and they showed that a good metric, and they use absence time to predict, was it was the frequency of access in the site. And for this, they could use that to predict whether users were going to renew their subscriptions and so on. So again, the same kind of thing, from seeing what's happening now and what you're trying to understand later. So just 2 slides. So conclusion. So I haven't told you what is an engaging site, because I don't know. Nobody knows. If we knew, we will all be rich. So, but hopefully I give you some insight about, through my experience, about measurement. So what is a good signal? Always think, what is a good signal? What is a good metric? From a signal, you can get 5 metrics. Some of them will not be good. And more importantly, what is a correct interpretation? Do you want people to click? Is a click valuable? Do you want people to spend time? Or do you want them to come and leave? And so on. No one measurement is perfect or complete. So this is why actually we're trying to map the various ones. You may want to look at a particular problem, so then small scale works, and so on. You may not have access to log data, so the web analytic will not work. What I talked about was mostly what I call the normal interaction. I intended a workshop when people were measuring engagement, when they were going on a, what do you call? Roller coaster? And they were measuring various kind of heat things. Of course, there was major difference. You know, if you're scared and going down, your body reacts much more than if you look at website 1 to website 2. Okay, so I was trying to explain, well, at Yahoo, we don't make people jump and measure the engagement. It's like a normal interaction, but it was fascinating and so on. Do not think that you know. Just like an experience we had. So we work in the context of advertising, in the context of mobile, and we thought only delivering mobile optimized ads, so when the user click on an ad, go onto the landing page, will be better. Of course, better experience. And then we use the dwell time as a metric to see, okay, good experience, people spend longer on the landing page before returning. Actually, we didn't observe that. Because when the page was mobile optimized, the user could decide much quicker, yes, no, return. Well, when it was not mobile optimized, they spent longer to decide whether they were going to spend time on the site or return. And again, if we were just using this metric into the ad ranking service, we will have just returned a lot of, it will have been complete chaos. So again, don't think that you know what you're doing. Don't think that you know what your user wants. You think that you don't like this. It doesn't mean that the user does not, and so on. So this is, yeah. And yeah, so there's just a book that I painfully wrote with 2 other colleagues, which has quite a lot of this. It will not tell you what is the engaging side, but how to measure it properly. Dankeschön.
So thank you very much, Mounia. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions, if there are any. Okay, 1 question here.
Thank you very much for the wonderful keynote. It's actually an add-on on your terms of objectivity and subjective. Objective means actually that you measure spontaneous behavior. And subjective is actually a controlled behavior. And it thinks it makes not much sense to try to predict spontaneous behavior by collecting our subjective feedbacks like self-report. In German there is a term, it's called doppelte Dissoziation, in English probably double dissociation. And it says that if you try to predict spontaneous behavior, you better have a spontaneous data that may explain your discrepancy between this where you try to predict positive effect based on the mouse behavior. It's maybe a possible explanation.
Okay, yeah, I will say the spontaneous behavior. So this is sites where people come regularly. So it's maybe less spontaneous. It's more that a pattern. If I read news, I will spend 5 minutes before doing something else. But it's true. There is this spontaneity that comes, and so on, especially when you get people and you ask them tasks they're not used to.
Okay. Maybe one short question from my side. I understood that measuring user engagement is a very complex thing, as many others in the research area. But since we have maybe a lot of people in the audience that are young practitioners or having small businesses and don't have that much of time and money to measure it, what would you recommend? What is the I know it's completely against the whole talk that you gave. But if you would need to do that, so imagine you are in a small company and you have like 1 day and not that much money, what would you do?
You have some computer science people? Okay, we'll first get your sites okay. Just make it usable, sort this out, which I think most people will do. And in the beginning, what I will do is just analyze the web analytics and see what's going on. Trying to understand, oh, this is weird, and then maybe design a study or get some people to come, and so on, and then feed this back and see if it improves. Sometimes you don't have an idea what is going to happen, so let it happen. Hopefully, before you go bankrupt, you realize, okay, I need to do something, and so on. And I think that's a lot of the work we do is like we see something, even at a large scale, and we say, oh, this is interesting. Let's see what's going on. And then study it, then plug it back.
Okay. So, thank you very much. Yeah. No, just keep it on. Just keep it on. It's okay. You can find Mounia here at the in the audience during the day, I think, and also on Twitter and on her blog, and also in various research papers that have nice titles like Penguins and Sweaters, I think. So, thank you very much for the for the keynote and for the first part. We are having a short break right now until 11 o'clock, and then we are starting on time. So sorry for the short break, but I think it was worth it.